The Chief Justice is the head of the judiciary, and in terms of the Constitution, they're in line to be head of state. The appointee is the most senior jurist in the country, responsible for the functioning of the Constitutional Court and acts as a guarantor of the independence of all the lower courts. Lawson, Naidoo, Executive Secretary of CASAC, joins us again. So, Lawson, take us through this difficult decision, the myriad challenges the president will have to face, and which of them is the most difficult? He spoke about the need for transparency in line with those who would guide him on making this decision. Is that the most difficult?
Many difficult decisions that the president has to make in this regard. I think if we go back to previous occasions, we're aware that certainly the last time when Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng became the Chief Justice, he was the only candidate nominated by President Zuma, and he was the only candidate interviewed by the Judicial Services Commission. As we know, that interview raised a huge public interest, controversy. It went on for a day and a half. And I think what President Ramaphosa is seeking to do now is to avert that scenario from recurring. And as he said at the Zondo Commission a few weeks ago, he wants to have a more open and transparent process. And I think there's a suggestion that the president might consult an informal advisory body to give him the names of perhaps 2 or 3 candidates that he can consider, and then refer that to the JSC, as well as to the leaders of political parties in the National Assembly, as he's obliged to do before he makes his choice. So the first phase would be this informal panel suggesting names to the president, then the JSC interviewing those candidates and making a recommendation to the president, but ultimately it is the decision of the president as to who becomes the next Chief Justice.
So, Lawson, I want to understand who qualifies. You mentioned precedents, and if one recalls at that time, there was a lot of talk. Justice Dikgang Moseneke, there were many people who said he's a natural choice. Firstly, then he was the deputy. It was said that he should be. And then there was the issue of qualifications, who would be a good administrative leader who has the requisite qualifications. So how does that work?
Well, I think, certainly, previously the Deputy Chief Justice back then in 2011 was Justice Dikgang Moseneke, who was, as you say, overlooked for the job, but ended up conducting the interviews at the JSC of Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng as he was then. So I think the issue here is that the president has a fairly wide discretion in who he appoints as the Chief Justice. For example, it doesn't have to be an existing member of the Constitutional Court. It can be a judge from outside of that, so the president would cast his net a little bit wider to look at justices on the Supreme Court of Appeal, as well as justices perhaps from some of the busier high courts in the country, Gauteng, the Western Cape come to mind immediately. So there's a fairly wide purview that the president can have. But I think it's also important to note, so it's not just appointing a Chief Justice as the head of the Constitutional Court. They have 2 other very important roles that they play. There is now established what is called the Office of the Chief Justice. It's essentially a government department that looks after the administration of the superior courts in the country, the high courts, the SDA, as well as the Constitutional Court. And then the Chief Justice also presides over the Judicial Service Commission. So these are 3, very important roles, and in many respects they require a different skill set. So, for example, at the Office of the Chief Justice, you need someone with good administrative skills, who's able to manage the various courts. At the JSC, you need somebody who's able to bring together the many constituencies that are represented at the JSC, which includes the judiciary, the executive, politicians, as well as representatives from the legal profession. And then finally, as the head of the Constitutional Court itself, you need someone who's a proven jurist, who is a constitutionalist to the core, and who embraces the notions of transformation of the judiciary and the transformation of our society through the law. So these are, very difficult characteristics to find in one single person.
Now, is the president limited to justices within the Constitutional Court? And when you talk about leadership, for instance, and I'm taking into account where we are, you have mentioned in an article that you've written that there's concern around the jurisprudential direction. So what kind of character are you looking for, and how would you describe the characteristics that would be requisite for leadership in this particular role?
Well, I think it needs to be a strong leader, somebody that's able to provide direction, to provide vision and guidance for the court, and to organize the work of the court in a way that it sets an example for the other courts across the country, in terms of its jurisprudential clarity. I think in recent times we've seen judgments that come out of the Constitutional Court that leave us rather confused as to the legal basis of some of the decision making, and I think that's where we need clarity. For example, we're beginning to see applications for rescission of judgments in the Constitutional Court, something that we haven't really seen before, and I think this reflects the weaknesses of the Constitutional Court, and we need to see clear direction there. At the JSC, I think again this has become a forum for political contestation. CASAC recently had to challenge the last round of interviews for the vacancies on the Constitutional Court because we believed that the JSC had not followed its constitutional mandate, and we were vindicated in that process. And the Chief Justice needs to take a firm grip on the JSC and ensure that when it asks questions of candidates, they are pertinent and relevant.
Lawson, we've run out of time, but I do have to ask this. The questions about the possibility of appointing a woman to the role, and it is at a time when Justice Mogoeng herself is retiring. What are the chances of that? If you can briefly, please.
Well, I think the President would certainly, take that into consideration very, very seriously and look at potential female candidates for Chief Justice. And we certainly hope to see at least one on the shortlist of candidates that is put forward to the JSC.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. Lawson Naidoo is the Executive Secretary of CASAC, which is a Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution.